Hello and welcome to another fabulous edition of Meet the Tech Titans. This, of course, is season 2 of this great podcast series that we've been obviously having, speaking to some fabulous and phenomenal individuals who obviously use the world of IT in their industries and how well they obviously use it. Now, we've actually spoken to a fair amount of individuals. We basically touched on fintech devices out there. We spoke about AI and marketing, what's going on with the insurgence as far as the AI is concerned, wherever. Today, we have another fabulous guest on the show. It's a conversation that I've been looking forward for a very long time. Trust me, it was very difficult to get a hold of him, but thankfully we have. And it's nice to actually finish off the series with this individual on the show with us. Yudhanjaya Wijeratne is our guest for the final episode of Meet the Tech Titans. Now, he's obviously he's a sci-fi author, he's a data scientist, founder of a fact-checking website. We just had a conversation regarding that. And all that basically is what he's been dabbling in. Right now, he's basically living away from the city of Colombo, hidden away in some little remote part of Kandy, not wanting to come to Colombo. Like I said, we're just thankful we dragged him out from the wilderness. Yudhanjaya, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Finally.
Oh, I still don't know what I'm doing here, but let's go to it.
So, I mean, like I said, data scientist, sci-fi author, obviously the fact-checking platform, dabbled in a lot of stuff. Let's talk about you getting into IT. What sort of basically attracted you to IT?
Oh, so like very early on, right, when I was a kid, we didn't have access to a TV or anything.
Right.
It was a very Spartan household. We had basically one radio playing Jim and one Jim Reeves cassette.
All right. On repeat.
On repeat. But the first sort of interaction with a computer was my cousin getting this computer that they set up at home, and everybody's playing games. And I'm watching the games, and I'm going, this is interesting. There's a whole other world beyond this thing that you're not just sitting there and receiving instructions from, but you're actually interacting with. So this seems interesting. So over the years, I got into computing at school, and fortunately, the school that I went to had a really good lab.
Okay.
And they were perfectly willing to, they didn't know what to do with me. So they basically let me run around, off periods, and I taught myself Visual Basic and stuff.
Okay.
And eventually I taught myself enough to put together my own computer out of spare parts and stuff that we found in Navala. And this sort of, I've always been fascinated by this thing of this machine, this little talking box, right? You can explain things to it, and you can get it to do stuff that seems a little bit beyond what most people in my circle could do.
Okay.
The kind of information access, the kind of things you could do were very different from what most people could conceptualize, and that was always very puzzling to me.
Right.
So as I went along, I dropped out of school to work at Redline. I basically dropped out of school to work.
Right.
I worked at Majestic City, selling keyboards and graphics cards and stuff at Redline. And I kept teaching myself computing. I kept figuring out, okay, what is this thing? How does it work? Can I teach myself to program it? And just by having direct access to the hardware and peripherals, I essentially taught myself to be a programmer. And a lot of the things built on from that, because I came to understand it as you are having a conversation with a machine. Slightly different from having a conversation with a human, but not that different.
Right.
There's a grammar, there's a structure, there's a logic, there's a language. And if you can get it to do very interesting things. And the older I grew, the more I realized these things seem to be somehow at the heart of how modern civilization functions. So it seemed appropriate that I should learn how these things worked. So, that was how I got in the community. Completely unorthodox. I don't have any formal training at all.
Right.
All of this is self-taught. And when I could afford it, then Coursera, edX, the MOOC platforms, and all of this is bouncing around and going, how do I do that? And then trying to figure out how to do that.
So obviously this was pretty much at a stage where not many people really wanted to get into computers the way that you did.
Yeah. I was very much, you have the stereotype of the nerd in the computer room. Now, when I became the nerd in the computer room, there was obviously you had, the old Linux folks who were like very hardcore into stuff, but you had a lot of people for whom a computer was just high five,
Right.
or email, and there was some function that they could see in their everyday periphery that they could use this for, but that's it. It's just a thing.
Right.
It wasn't the sort of all-consuming interest
Right.
at the time.
It was pretty much something where you can actually get it to do something that you want it to do,
Yeah.
but not necessarily push the boundaries knowing that it can do more.
Yeah, and you had to poke and prod to find where the boundaries were. And I got my start doing completely nefarious stuff.
Right.
I wrote viruses for a school lab. I managed to lock down school labs. I managed to, get exam papers out.
Wow.
And do all sorts of stuff that I'm probably not going to confess to right now. But I can say I was experimenting.
Okay, so now at that stage, clearly, like we spoke about the fact that you knew there was so much more that the
Yeah.
computers can do, and that fascinated you,
Yeah.
right? Come forward maybe like 25, 30 years
Yeah.
at this point, the emergence of AI.
Yeah.
Do you have that same feeling? Does it fascinate you the way it was at that stage?
Kind of. Because, one of the fundamental challenges, there's a great essay called Software is Eating the World. Some of the assumptions, I believe, are now a little bit outdated, but the core tenet of it is computers are the bedrock of what we call modern civilization.
Right.
And the future is ultimately going to be very hard bifurcated into people who can talk to the machine and people who can't. And more or less, we have seen that come true, even in our societies, where initially social weight was doctor, lawyer, engineer. But now you're seeing software engineers. Everybody wants to be a software engineer.
Yeah.
So we've kind of seen that come true. And with AI, the interesting thing that happens is that interface with the machine just got incredibly easy. So computer programming, interacting with the machine, getting it to do things, you've gone from punch cards to typing out machine code, to learning esoteric languages, to figure out how to move a byte of memory from here to here, to then learning more complex languages to do the kind of data cleaning or data science visualizations, writing programs. Now it's, hey computer, can you do this? So now that interface has narrowed to essentially just being mostly the English language.
Right.
That I find fascinating, because we're at that stage where skill is still in the equation. You still have to understand concepts, architecture, but that language barrier has almost vanished between the machine and the human. Is it being used for interesting things? I think jury is still out on that. For those of us who have been in machine learning, over the last over the last decade, let's say,
Right.
there have been phenomenal advances that I think actually can be useful to civilization. But so much energy is going into building yet another chat application, yet another QA bot or whatever. Like, there are trivial uses,
Right.
there are interesting uses, and in between there's a whole bunch of really problematic stuff we also have to sort out. Copyright, where does the data come from? How do creators get paid for this stuff? The whole Silicon Valley versus China setup that we've got going on. There's a whole bunch of really big gorillas in the room fighting over each other right now.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting time to be alive and go, okay, what of this? Which parts of this do we connect in which direction?
See, the funny thing that we obviously have realized is in the past, when something's actually released to the world,
Yeah.
they're actually released in stages.
Yeah.
Because there's a ton of work that's actually done behind it,
Yeah.
and they will sort of also look at the repercussions, the pros and the cons, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What we have now
Yeah.
is boom,
Yeah.
here you go,
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah.
That's a problem, right?
That is a problem, because like if you look at, say, what we're essentially dealing with is workplace automation, right? The driving question of our times. if you look at blue collar automation, that arrived in a much slower fashion
Right.
than this did.
Yeah.
Where, you know,
Much slower.
Much slower, right? You might start with the loom, and then, okay, next day, 10 years down the line, you've got a machine that picks apart and puts it here. Maybe 10 years the line, the old guys are complaining about the fact that that machine is now feeding another machine and that guy is gone. But there's a sense of, okay, there's a controllable sense of progress where all the, as many as possible of the kinks in this technology are going to be ironed out. And it's initially going to make its way to really expensive stages, commercial stages, military, heavy industry stuff before filtering down.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing with the internet and with sort of this age that we're living is that innovation comes at successively faster times. And right now the cycle is like this.
Yeah.
Last year, ChatGPT is a joke application that you can talk and say, oh, look, AI is not going to take over our jobs. Now it's, oh, wow, this lesson plan is better than my own.
Right.
Next year is going to be something even worse or better. So the rate of progress is incredible, and it's really jarring to a lot of people. There's an excellent saying, like, anything invented, any technology that was invented before you were 35 is new and exciting. Anything invented after you're 35 is god-awful, is Satan's spawn, and should be, those kids should not be meddling with it anymore. We're seeing that window just collapse in real time.
Right. Okay, so now that brings us to the next question, what we're really going to be basically diving into. Like we spoke about AI and ChatGPT out there, it's taken the world by storm, right? Every country is now, yes, whilst appreciating it's there, also looking at the repercussions it could actually have.
Yeah.
Now, you have actually got yourself in Sri Lanka's National AI Advisory Committee, right? How did you get there, right? I mean, firstly, we'll find out as to how you got in there, and then we'll figure out as to what is Sri Lanka going to do, planning to do as an advisory committee, and what are you advising on?
How I got in there is pretty simple. They called, I don't know if I should disclose the name, but they basically called and said, hey, we sent you an email invite a few days ago. And I said, yeah, I ignored it. And I called and said, would you mind, would you mind picking up the phone?
Right.
Because I also have, in a sense, a luxury of working in an eccentric fashion. I am sufficiently detached from many things that, I mean, you've seen my setup and so on. I'm sufficiently detached that I can sit in a corner and think.
Which is very true.
Which is
very true.
Which is what I like doing.
Right.
I like sitting in a corner and thinking. And every so often people will come to me and go, what do you think is going to happen in the next X many years?
Right.
And this to some extent has been a driving force behind my science fiction. It's been a driving force behind some of the futurism work I've done for UNDP, the stuff you'll see with me speak at NATO and so on and so forth. It's this question of what might happen next. Can you put the what if brain to work?
Right.
So I was invited. The person who invited me to actually join this is Harsha Persingha,
Right.
a guy who I have tremendous respect for.
Yep.
Because way back when, when we were doing README, for example, I interviewed this guy. And Harsha is kind of a force of nature.
He's told me this story.
Once he starts going on something, he ain't gonna stop.
Yeah.
So I said yes, and so I said, okay, let me see what I can add to the conversation. So the way these things are structured is there is essentially a large committee of various people who represent various interests. None of these people are paid or anything. There's a bunch of people there who are considered domain experts, plugged and put there. And then you sort of initially, there's this thing of trying to figure out what each person is interested in, and then going, right, here are the silos, here are the, the buckets of things that you're working on so that people can get more specific.
Right.
So what I've mostly done, what myself, Srinath, Chandika, where we've gone is essentially tried to figure out, okay, what projects exist where we are actually personally interested in accelerating that endeavor, where we can actually technically, properly technically contribute.
Right.
Because I don't just necessarily want to spend my time sitting and talking to people. I want to be building stuff.
Right.
That's a good use of my time. If you want people to sit there and have good conversations, you call another guy. That ain't me. And we've gone, okay, this particular thing that we are working, the things that I'm involved in, very specific, are the Government Information Center, which is the question of how do we make it so that Sri Lankan citizens can access information regarding the government or how to do things in an easy manner.
Right.
And what are all the other technologies needed to make that work? So currently there is a thing called the Government Information Center. There's a web page. Then there's a call center that handles thousands of calls a day. And the tragedy of dealing with the Sri Lankan government, as we've explained to the government, is that nobody wants to deal with the government.
Yeah.
Dealing with it is a god-awful cluster mess.
Right.
Like the
I
government.
don't think the government wants to deal with the government.
Nobody, like everybody knows this is a problem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But fixing it is difficult. For example, I pointed out that if you want to know, if you turn 18 in this country and you want to know how to do something, how do you pay taxes, how do you get married, how do you do any of this, how the hell are you going to find out this information?
True.
There is a website. Sure, you go to the website and it's so badly organized that the application, say, for filing a permit for mineral sand digging is classified under agriculture and livestock. So you have to know that some government bureaucrat thought that sand is a type of livestock. And that's the structure of information there. So when we approached this, we basically went, okay, what would the ideal design be like? What is the simplest possible way of fixing this with the data we have, with the tools we have, with the level of technology we have? How do we approach the problem of that call center getting inundated because this thing is not great and therefore common sense queries are also being posed? Yeah, how do we help those guys who are actually working? Can we talk to them? Instead of sitting on government committees, can we go talk to the people doing the work?
Right.
And figure out, hey, what are your pain points? And then we'll sit together and go, okay, what would a technical solution to this be? And then I essentially went, okay, we've got a decent idea on what it should be. Now, before we, and this is a very touchy point of mine, before as government starts handing out contracts to big companies to do stuff, we need to know what it takes to build that thing, which means we got to build it.
Right.
So build a prototype. This website which is a replacement for the Government Information Center, where you can come and ask, hey, I just turned 18, what do I need to know as a citizen? And it'll go, well, here are things you may need to know. This, here are the forms you need to fill, here's how insurance works, here's how these things work, here's how you get a police report, here's how your ID works. And you can ask common sense questions of a government and it will say, here are the forms, here's this. So you think about information standards, all of this stuff, and use that to refine this and go, right. Here is clarity on what we should be building.
Okay.
So that's what we are there to do, essentially. Right. To say, here is the best way to allocate this government money dedicated to this vertical. If you want something to come out of it, here's how we structure the project.
Right.
So there's this, there's a lot that goes into that of doing RFPs and all of that. And those are also sometimes tricky. For example, Dr. Srinath and I have spent the last so many days working out the RFP for the Government Information Center. And the RFP is the government says, this is what we got to build. Here are the criteria, here are the performance targets, here's how it's got to work. And now companies are allowed to bid on this. This process does not always generate good results. Case in point, the existing stuff, it sucks. So then how do we make it so that it doesn't suck? How do we design it so that we know the end product is going to be good? How do we make it open source? Because governments easily fall into the trap of paying software vendors. Sure. We've seen this with Watchdog multiple times with the State Pharmaceuticals Corporation. So then I'll go back to that archive and go, okay, how was the best way to deal with that? How do we make sure the code is open source? How do we make sure this data and the code and this implementation belongs to the people, with a caveat being there has to be someone who is going to maintain this.
Right.
You can't have abstractions of the people.
That's true.
Who is the government ministry who is going to maintain this? How are those guys going to get paid? Who's the project managers on this thing? So actually, like, how does this stuff come together? So it's a lot of project planning.
A lot of bureaucracy at the same time, isn't it?
I have been tactically avoiding as much of the bureaucracy as possible by simply not showing up.
Good for you.
Yeah. So my whole thing has been, hey guys, I live in a remote, mountain. I've got monkeys outside my door. I will design this thing for you. You want to present it at the meeting? Yeah, no, I'm doing that. Now, there's a limited number of times I can use that card,
That's
but
true.
I've used it as much as possible. But yes, you do have to actually talk to the people who are doing that work. Because in some cases, there's a process in government. They know it's a bad process, but someone's been doing the work.
Right.
And maybe that person has been completely ignored by the line ministry, underfunded, and maybe that person knows why this particular page reads like it was written by 3 different monkeys on crack cocaine. Why is the information that bad? And there's probably a reason there. So you really got to dig deep and go, hey, person doing the work, what can you tell us? Okay, because the danger of creating a technical solution from a high-flying 30,000-foot view is while you can design the perfect system on paper, in practice it ain't never going to work. So you really have to interface with all of this. Fortunately, with a lot of the people in the committee, particularly people like Harsha Purasinghe, he's taking care of a lot of the let me go talk to X ministry.
Right.
So in a sense that simplifies our working conditions, where we can say, hey, for this, we need this data, we need to build these archives, nationally available, free and open source. Here's what we need. This many people, this much. What can you swing? And he'll go away and talk to the ministers, the various bureaucrats, and come back and go, okay, these are the resources that we can commit to this table.
Right.
And then sometimes it'll work the other way around as well, where someone will float an idea, and I will occasionally explode and go, that is a stupid idea. We should not be spending millions of dollars on that. Before we do that, we should be building hospitals and roads.
Right.
And it's good to have a little bit of the tension in these things, because that way the decent ideas have a higher chance of survival and the really stupid ones hopefully sink and die.
So what is the national AI strategy? Is there a national AI strategy? We hear about it.
Yeah.
We hear it's a fancy word,
Yeah.
right? The national AI strategy.
Yeah.
What is it?
Good, that is a tough question. The national AI strategy is still being built.
Okay.
The national AI strategy is largely, right now, has been to figure out what this AI thing is and how we can maybe plaster it into places. But then we've gone in and said, you shouldn't be doing the plastering thing. We have to think critically and carefully about every single thing we do.
Right.
Otherwise, just take the money, spend it on roads,
Right.
spend it on hospitals. Right? We have, we need electricity in this country. We got bigger shit to take care of.
Yeah.
If we are spending a cent, it should be spent carefully. So, going back to that committee structure of there are different buckets of things. So each bucket then proposes, here are things we want to do. So our bucket is we want to improve the ease at which citizens can access government services and information. Okay, so that is a part of a sub-strategy. Another bucket will go, we need to educate.
Right.
We need to build educational resources for people looking to use these tools but have no context. So that's another part of it. Now, many of these buckets are decided, but not all. There is, for example, an ambitious conversation happening about how do we make data available from and where. Where does Sri Lanka's data generation come from? The Department of Census and Statistics, which collects incredible amounts of data. If you want to know how many acres of bee onions are grown in Sri Lanka, DCS will have it. If you want to know, for example, from their census work, the education levels, roofing tile quality, how people dispose of garbage in any given village or Gramanilari division, DCS has it.
Right.
How do we make that data? How do we unlock that tier of data so that politicians, decision makers can actually use this? That's another question that's happening. Not all of these things are fully decided yet.
Right.
And the shape of some of these things, you know, it may not work out.
Right.
Some of them will be better than we expect them to. Some of them will probably fall flat.
And there's also this, obviously there is a talk that you need to make AI inclusive and ethical.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, something that the committee is also possibly discussing, or is it part of the discussion?
It is part of the discussions. The inclusivity aspect is, you know, we're starting from a language inclusivity, Sinhala, Tamil.
Right.
But, you know, as I sometimes have the pleasure of being thorn in people's side and saying, that's all great, that's a nice bunch of words. In practice, we need to pony up about 2 trillion tokens of text. If we want to get Sinhala in there, we got to build the data. And building data is the unsexy work behind all of this stuff. Other countries have done it, which is why, you know, the Europal corpus is why you will see a hell of a lot of European languages being used in natural language processing, and then that gets normalized and then that ends up in AI. We haven't done the work. So we got to do the work. So now let's talk about doing the work.
Right.
So there is the whole push of making this inclusive and ethical, but we need to be more specific, which is where I'm trying to poke and prod and go, what are we specifically doing? For example, on the ethical side of things, I'm an author. From the recent Washington Post article about the books that have been taken for training data. My stuff is on it. Now, I don't mind people passing around an EPUB of my work, or someone buying the book and going, hey, this is good, and giving it to a friend. But you got a $40 billion corporation sitting on the other end ingesting that data. Okay, ethically, there should be some sort of redistribution. But then practically, how do we do it? Are we, as Sri Lankans, do we have sovereign power to mandate what Microsoft is going to train on? We kind of don't. Jurisdictional boundaries are completely on the other side. What can we actually do? How does that integrate with existing law? Because we also can't reinvent the wheel here. Then that's a whole other chapter of stuff to think about.
Right. I mean, like you said, it's quite difficult to put them into practice.
Yeah, because the problem with the world is, in general, there's a lot of good hazy intentions, and there's a lot of good hazy conversations.
Right. But
where specifics matter.
Exactly. The specifics is what I was basically coming to get into, because like you brought up a great example with your material, which is available for others to use for whatever, right? It could also,
which is currently in AI training corpuses on the internet.
Now, just like you, individuals in other industries who've already released their products or their works or whatever, which actually is available out there. How do other, I mean, for example, you did mention as Sri Lankan sitting here, we do have issues, obviously. We don't have jurisdiction, like, for example, if Microsoft decides to use it. But you can't be the only one who's going through this.
No, absolutely not.
How do others encounter or counter this, or can they counter this?
Well,
because the reason I'm asking you this, Yudha, is because we're just at the beginning of this.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
There is like millions ahead.
Absolutely.
If we don't decide to have certain ethical boundaries now, we've missed the bus.
Yeah, and we are going to keep missing that bus.
Right.
You know, this is one of the things where there's almost like schools of thought about this. There's an accelerationist school of thought even within the committees and subcommittees that like, okay, this thing is coming, we can't fight it, we gotta get the jump on this, and we gotta have all our employees using this, we gotta 10x this, and some of it is like, is enough. Then there is a school of thought that is, okay, we need to move very cautiously and carefully, but the question of what can we actually practically do? Now, if you look at artists and authors in the US, for example, they're launching lawsuits against OpenAI by saying there's an existing law called copyright, there are existing mechanisms of enforcing it. What these guys are doing is in violation of copyright. So it's that legal link that's been made. in Sri Lanka, do we have laws good enough to enforce this?
Do we even have copyright laws?
We technically do, but
We do.
does anybody
Enforce it?
Yeah, I mean, has anybody enforced copyright seriously here? Outside of a handful of notable cases,
Right.
you know, we don't even have forget the legal jargon. Do we have the legal expertise to define, hey, this is this person's intellectual property, when a land case will take 10 to 15 years?
True.
Or a much more serious category of crime, I would say a rape case, would take even longer to go through the Sri Lankan justice system.
Right.
I mean, can we, like, do we have the capacity to actually even do this? So, right now...
But that doesn't mean you give up, do you?
No, it doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't. So, there are all sorts of interesting poisoning attacks going on. For example, someone invented this thing called Nightshade, which basically poisons JPEGs. And the idea is that it will make its way to training data. You know, you look at an image, you see a house, the AI model looks at it, sees a duck. It's not good because you can break this kind of stuff and this stuff gets broken.
Right.
So there's a cat and mouse game happening in some parts of the technological circle. There's a cat and mouse game happening in some parts of legal circles. Right now, we as Sri Lankans are totally outside this. And a lot of the feeling in artist circles that I know is odd. One is this adamant refusal that goes, no, AI will never create art. But also this fear of AI is going to take the jobs that actually keep us alive. These two viewpoints are simultaneously held, and in many cases what it forces people to do is go into the shell of, we don't know how to deal with this, we can't deal with this, we don't have any kind of power in this conversation, therefore all we can do is sort of back away and just keep our heads down and hope this shit show blows over. Or maybe Photoshop will integrate this in the next update or whatever it is. That's a dangerous position for us to be in. It's a position of helplessness. What to actually do about it? You know, my answers are not going to be anywhere near as good as some of the foremost legal theorists happening right now, but we should at least be involved and ready for that conversation. So as far as the committee stuff goes, we have a time limit. We're essentially on this for 12 months. We can't pass law in 12 months. The way law and policy makes its way into government takes years, sometimes even decades of consultation and back and forth, modifying bills, votes, all of that. So within the 12-month window, this is totally out of scope for us right now. As far as the committee goes, like this has been brought up, we've gone, yes, this has to be done, but we got only so many months to go.
Right.
That being said, is it a thing we're actively trying to ignore? No. But it is still in the dangerous state of this is out of our hands right now, and it is a very dangerous place for us to be.
Isn't there a framework that you could actually sort of rely on? I mean, like a global framework, for example, like UNESCO's AI ethic guidelines or things like that?
The UNESCO guidelines and bullshit doesn't matter.
Right.
It really doesn't, because there is this completely wishy-washy school of thinking of going, oh, if we write guidelines, they won't do it. Or if we write down a nice thing, people will no longer commit war crimes.
Right.
That don't happen. You need a big hammer, you need a big stick, and the big stick is traditionally the law. If you look at all government as being built around the legal monopoly of violence, right? All governance and enforcement of law happens because we have said this entity, the government, has the monopoly on violence. If you violate these conditions, they will commit violence unto your person, put you in jail, take away your stuff. That's committing violence. For this to work, it has to fit within that frame. For this to actually have any effect. Because UNESCO writes a guideline on ethical use of AI. Who reads it? Right. Not the people building AI.
Right.
Not the data scientists cleaning the data. Not the research labs training on stuff. It's going to be read by a handful of people in every foreign ministry, and they're going to turn that into another PDF and put it out there. Nobody cares. That thing is also going to be AI training data. Literally nobody cares about this stuff. So this is why I say there's a lot of wishy-washy thinking around these circles. You need to actually, the key solution to this is to bring this back to this issue of copyright, ethical use, define what fair use is, define what theft is. A lot of this thinking has already been done. It's been done around ebooks. It's been done around shadow libraries. The DMCA. Remember back in the in music, Napster, LimeWire. These things are nuked into oblivion, right?
Yeah.
And I hate to agree with record companies in any way, but there is legal precedent. We just, for some reason, seem to be tiptoeing around this fact.
Yeah.
As a world, we're collectively going, yes, but AI is the future. So, oh no, why don't we just woo and just forget about this? It's a very weird place to be in right now.
In your personal opinion, we're talking about ethics, we're talking about AI. In your personal opinion, what are the biggest concerns when it comes to AI ethics in Sri Lanka?
Biggest concern when it comes to AI ethics in Sri Lanka is the lack of personal data protection. There is nothing right now that makes it illegal for companies. Like, I've worked on various parts of data protection law in my career in public policy. We don't have really strong controls that prevent a company from gathering your personal information and feeding it into any number of models. We don't have a lot of stuff going on that makes it illegal, for example, for a company to take your personal photos, the photos of your family, your children, all that, and use that to retrain something.
Right.
Or use the personally identifiable information of tens of thousands of people, or even millions. I remember back when I was working at Learnasia, we used the pseudo-anonymized call detail records of 10 million people. So every time you make a phone call, the tower you connect to the tower, that connects to the other person. And you can kind of figure out where people live and where they go to work by looking at the times and periods in which towers they connect to.
Right.
And we use this to make recommendations of here's where you should build roads, right? Here's where you should build infrastructure. This is where the utility of things are going to go because here are people moving from here to here. But we pseudo-anonymize the data because we had to present it as academically defensible work, but there was nothing back then to force us to do it. There still kind of isn't capability. State capability doesn't exist. And then there's also the question of should state capability exist, given that in Sri Lanka the traditional job of any government is to take over as much state capability as possible. Should we really give the government bigger and bigger sticks? Is also a problem. Then where do the solutions come from? If not this whole realm of law and regulation, that's also a headache. So my biggest fear right now, my personal biggest fear is the rampant use of personally identifiable data and the fact that companies can put you on anything from sell your number to any number of SMS spammers to collect your stuff in a database and build detailed profiles on you, and there's no oversight around that. That's a little bit dangerous.
Are you excited in the next 5-10 years? There is like so much you can actually do with AI.
Yeah.
But at the same time, are you worried the amount that AI can actually do is also going to trigger certain other little nuclear bombs all over that come with it?
Yes, I think for any new technology, that is my stance is always for any new technology, it's a certain amount of cautious optimism.
Right.
Because you can be pessimist.
Yeah.
The pessimist position is easy to take, and it's one that I find myself defaulting to when I look at something. Yes, I can see a million ways for that to go wrong. Yes, I can. I will usually write those things, put in a book, and sell that book to people. But you need to engage with any of these technologies to understand what they're capable of. So that requires willingness to engage. Even if the technology is eventually going to be an enemy, you need to know your enemy. So you kind of have to see what things can do. The general future of all of this stuff, from what we are seeing, is vastly divided. Like today I spent a lot of time talking to some very intelligent people who are in the industry, Srinath and I were basically having this conversation of, realistically right now there's still no way that AI would replace a seasoned software engineer because a lot of the architecture, the thinking is still not there yet. At the same time, someone who we would go, yeah, that's a very smart dude, thinks it'll happen within the next 2 years. So there is this vastly conflicting opinions. And for certain jobs, yes, there are plenty of, for example, marketing departments, internal marketing departments, writing copy and creating, graphics. A lot of that has already shifted. People are already using ChatGPT. People are already using image generators. Everybody's already doing it. So they're kind of turning themselves into cyborgs, which is very interesting. So I think the most probable future that we're heading to is something actually that already happened in chess. Are you familiar with Garry Kasparov?
Yes.
Kasparov, one of the world's greatest chess masters, right? Gets defeated by IBM's Deep Blue.
Right.
And the headlines are very similar to what we see today, which is man defeated by machine. Computers are coming. The human race is done. The smartest man on the planet has just been taken down. Kasparov comes back with a field called centaur chess, advanced chess, where he says the future is not going to be human versus machine. It's going to be human plus machine versus human plus machine.
Right.
And he debuts this field where people actually use chess engines to play chess, and you suddenly find random 15-year-olds playing at like grandmaster stages because the machine brings the depth search and the human brings the flair, the creativity, the strategy. And in subsequent years, we have not seen, if you take the limited field of chess, we have not seen people watching computer chess streaming. We watch Magnus Carlsen.
Right.
We watch the Botezes. We watch the humans, the drama, the flair. That's still there. So I think that's kind of the synthesis future is what we're heading to. I think humans have always been tool users. You and I are functionally incredible cyborgs right now. We're able to communicate over impossible distances instantly. We are able to navigate places that we have never seen before, and magical lines on a thing that will directly say here's where you need to go to and here's how long you'll take to get there. These are abilities and powers that a king in the 13th century would have murdered millions for and have.
True.
For a single map.
Right.
Whereas for us, it's like, this map is like, it's not 3D yet. Right? It's trivial to us.
Yeah.
We are cyborgs. We are tool users. And I think this is what people are. This is what the ultimate expression of all of this will be.
What's fascinating is the fact that right throughout this series, almost every single guest that I've actually had on the series, we spoke about AI and the benefits of AI in their industries.
Yeah.
This is the first time we're actually talking about AI behind them. And obviously getting like amount of information from you as to it's easy to obviously talk about something when you have read it, but you're living it.
Yeah.
You're in it.
Yeah.
You know exactly what's actually going on. Are we in for a wild ride with AI? Or again, like you said, you do want to be cautiously optimistic, or do we all have to be cautiously optimistic when AI or a new AI drop comes around?
I think we're going to plateau.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
I think we're going to hit a point where essentially your phone or whatever tool you have becomes a second mind, a mind that functionally has almost the entire knowledge of the human race, may not entirely be, up to par with an expert
Right.
in anything, but a really, really smart genie that lives in your pocket. And we can look back to analogies of this idea of the genie, the jinn, to see what people do when given that power. And I think what we are going to head into is there's going to be a huge amount of noise around, this new model dropped, this dropped, this changes the game. In the background, people are slowly going to be building workflows for their particular tools that they have some particular, affiliation for. Maybe someone has figured out that this particular tool lets them copy edit sentences faster. Maybe someone's figured out that this particular tool lets them write this particular JavaScript or Go for their software job a little bit faster, or write automated tests. little pieces of these things, and we'll have these pocket minds. And that'll be really interesting because it's kind of a future where every single person has a personal assistant who is a little bit like Jeeves from the Bertie and Wooster books. The real question of the Jeeves books is always, why the hell does Jeeves tolerate Bertie?
Right.
Because Bertie's a bumbling idiot. The danger will be in that this process is going to be massively asymmetric. So as we've seen, culture, capital, power is incredibly concentrated in the world right now. So you're going to find a layer of few people who essentially become superstars, the 100x people, because they understand how to use these and they understand how to plug in the gaps in their own thinking and they understand how to leverage the hell out of that. You're going to see a layer of people who need to use this to get by. Because now the economic system has gotten a lot crueler for them, because now your manager demands that you make 35 videos in a week, whereas previously it was 3, and he's going, you just use AI. So now that person is really suffering. And then there's a layer underneath where most people will look at them and go, but why would I interact with that person when a $20 subscription will do? That layer is already happening.
Yeah.
If you go on Sri Lanka Reddit, for example, it's full of fresh, young software engineers who are coming out of the education system, can't get a job as an intern, can't find an internship. I mean, people used to massively take in interns. Nobody's hiring interns anymore because Claude is $20 a month and it already knows more than this person. So now that person it's very difficult for them to actually acquire the skill they need. So now we're in danger of creating this very bifurcated economic system. So the future is going to be very, very bright for the top, I would say 20%, who are already in a pretty good position. The future is going to be kind of cyborg, very adaptive, very shape-shifting, mutates quite a lot for another 20%, I'd say. And the rest is actually in a pretty dark and dangerous place. That's not a good recipe.
It's certainly not.
It's really not a good recipe. This is how you get revolutions.
Wow, this is ridiculous. It's been fabulous. I mean, to understand understand AI from a perspective that we don't necessarily see it.
From the perspective of a guy wearing a cat T-shirt.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit. I mean, I try to stay away from by looking at the cat T-shirt as much as possible because
because in my field, in my very specific subfield, writing, it's something that's already directly under threat.
Yes.
So I have to be the guy in the cat T-shirt.
Yeah. But no, it has. It really is. I mean, as a final question, just before we wind up the episode, in terms of, where are we going with AI? I mean, what you just mentioned a few seconds ago, is talking about a bleak future. It's happy for the individuals who are right up there, like you said, right?
It's an unevenly distributed future. So William Gibson, one of the foremost writers in the cyberpunk genre, likes to point out that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
And I think that is one of the cornerstones of our particular era of technological change. Like, it's here. Some guy in Google is already using this to earn $1 million salary or whatever. Another bunch of people are doing, like their productivity output just exploded. They look like they're 10x engineers or 10x writers or researchers or whatever. A whole bunch of people looking up at this and going, that's going to rain.
Right. And we possibly, maybe, I don't know, are in a situation where there were people using machine learning and AI on their own.
Yeah.
And when this came out to the world, they're like, oh my God, now it's just a level playing field.
Yeah.
Everybody's out there basically doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that field, like, so my specific specialty within the natural language programming subfield is corpus linguistics. I built corpora of like 28 billion singular words, misinformation detection, hate speech detection, parts of speech. Like, all of my published papers are in this stuff, right? Overnight, it feels like the field just is vanishing Because why would you now learn what a morpheme is? Why would you learn how to build a lemmatizer or a stemmer from scratch when this model is existing, open source? Maybe you can just download it, get it done, bam, clean your data in 10 seconds flat. And for a lot of those people who are doing interesting stuff with that, people who are like really interesting, or you're working with the stuff, they're also they're back down to being plebs.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see.
It is. Tough. Anyway, Yudha, thank you so much for coming down to
Thank you for having
Colombo, so to say. And
I hate this place.
It's well, all the very best for your drive back to Kandy.
Thank
But
you.
Honestly,
Thank
it really has actually opened our minds in terms of what AI is. Okay, look, we all knew what AI is capable of doing,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, there hasn't been anyone like you who's basically indicated 5, 10, 15 years, this is what it's going to do. This is what it's capable of.
I have to say I could be wrong.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody's a prophet. I don't think I'm too off the mark.
Right.
But just dropping the caveat in there.
Yeah.
Because this stuff tends to go badly wrong sometimes when it does.
Anyway, so Yudhanjaya right here on Meet the Tech Titans, and he's definitely a titan for sure. Obviously giving us a lowdown as AI is concerned, machine learning, ChatGPT, the tools out there that's going to make our lives easier, if it not has already made our lives easier. But is that the only thing it is going to do? That's the question that the world has. How are you sort of going to streamline it? Are there new rules that are going to come into play? Are countries going to basically have bills stating the fact that these are the things that you can do, this is what you can't do? There's so much that we really do not know, because right now we're just at the, demo mode of whatever basically we have right now. We're playing around with it, we're having fun. But like Yudha said, there's a lot more that's basically there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being a part of Meet the Tech Titans Season 2. And a big thank you out to Hutch for being a part of this, for being a part of the thought leadership process that we actually have. And here we are hoping that we'll see you once again in our 3rd season of Meet the Tech Titans, where we speak to individuals out there who are grappling with IT in their own industries, making it work and making sure it is a success. Till the next one, have yourself a wonderful day.